The morning sun cast long shadows across Geneva's Golden Square district as René Baptiste pushed open the heavy glass doors of Maison Éternelle. The boutique gleamed with a kind of polished elegance that whispered exclusivity in every carefully placed item, every strategically positioned mirror. Renee wore a simple cotton blouse, well-fitted jeans, and her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. Nothing about her appearance screamed wealth, and that was entirely intentional. She had flown from New York specifically for this moment, though no one in this pristine palace of luxury could possibly understand why. At 42, Renee had perfected the art of invisibility. She moved through the world like a ghost, observing, calculating, testing. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was the majority shareholder of Éternelle International, the very corporation that owned this boutique and 200 others like it across the globe. But her face remained unknown, her identity carefully guarded behind layers of shell corporations and legal entities. She preferred it that way. It allowed her to see the truth of things, the raw reality beneath the polished surface. Christine, a store associate with severely pulled-back blonde hair and an expression of perpetual disdain, noticed Renee immediately. Her eyes traveled from Renee's simple shoes to her unadorned face, making calculations that took mere seconds. Without a word, Christine began to follow her, maintaining a distance of precisely 3 feet, close enough to intimidate, far enough to claim innocence. When Renee paused to examine a display of silk scarves, Christine was there, immediately straightening items that didn't need straightening. When Renee moved toward the handbag section, Christine physically stepped between her and the display, her fingers already reaching for the walkie-talkie clipped to her designer belt. The boutique hummed with quiet activity. Other customers, all impeccably dressed, all unmistakably wealthy, all white, glided through the space like swans on a private lake. A young associate appeared at their elbows with crystal flutes of champagne, smiling with practiced warmth. Renee watched as this same associate made eye contact with her, then deliberately looked away, disappearing into a back room as if suddenly remembering an urgent task. The message was clear, delivered without a single word spoken. Renee's hand reached for a handbag, a stunning piece in midnight blue leather with gold hardware. The price tag read 15,000 euros, though Renee knew the actual cost of production was closer to 800 euros. She had approved the markup herself, sitting in a corporate board meeting a year ago, listening to executives justify luxury pricing strategies. Before her fingers could touch the buttery leather, Christine's manicured hand snatched the bag away with a speed that bordered on aggressive. "That's not available," Christine said, her voice dripping with false regret. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the outlet mall. There's one about 30 minutes outside the city. Very affordable options there." She emphasized the word affordable as if it were a life raft she was graciously throwing to a drowning woman. Renee said nothing. She simply smiled, a small knowing curve of her lips that Christine would later remember in her nightmares, and continued browsing. She had learned long ago that silence was its own form of power, that the refusal to react often spoke louder than any words. The energy in the boutique shifted dramatically when the Van Ryn family made their entrance. They didn't walk in so much as they materialized, bringing with them an atmosphere of entitlement so thick it seemed to displace the oxygen. Hendrik Van Ryn, 73, carried himself with the rigid posture of old European money. His wife Beatrice wore her wealth like armor, each piece of jewelry a declaration of social supremacy. But it was their daughter Caroline who commanded attention, her phone already raised, recording everything for her 3 million social media followers. "Welcome back, Mrs. Van Ryn," the manager Philippe practically sang, materializing from his office with the enthusiasm of a man greeting royalty. "The items you requested have arrived. And may I say, your daughter looks radiant today." Caroline smiled at the compliment, adjusting her angle to ensure the boutique's elegant interior served as the perfect backdrop for her live stream. "Hey, luxury lovers," she cooed into her phone. "Back at my favorite Geneva spot. You know I only feature the best of the best here. Her eyes landed on Renee, and something ugly flickered across her carefully made-up face. She lowered her voice to a stage whisper, ensuring her phone captured every word. Even here you can't escape them. This is exactly why memberships exist, you know, to maintain a certain standard. The comment section of her livestream exploded with fire emojis and laughing faces. Renee watched the cruelty unfold in real time, saw the casual racism packaged as aspirational content, delivered to millions with a smile and perfect lighting. She continued browsing, her face impassive, even as her heart began to pound with a familiar mixture of rage and disappointment. Some things, it seemed, never changed, no matter how much money she poured into diversity initiatives and corporate training programs. Beatrice's voice cut through the boutique's refined atmosphere like a knife through silk. Philippe, darling, we really must discuss the exclusivity standards here. The whole point of shopping at Maison Éternelle is the curation, the selection, the absolute assurance that one is among one's peers. She didn't look at Renee as she spoke, didn't need to. The target of her complaint was unmistakable. Must you really let anyone wander in off the street? Philippe's face flushed with embarrassment and something else, something that looked uncomfortably like agreement. Before he could respond, Caroline had drifted closer to Renee, filming, narrating, turning a woman's simple shopping trip into content for her followers' entertainment. She made a show of examining a perfume display near Renee, then stumbled, arms flailing with theatrical drama. The bottles crashed to the marble floor, exploding in a cloud of expensive fragrance and shattered glass. "Oh my God!" Caroline gasped, jumping back, her phone still recording. "Look what you made me do." These were limited edition. Philippe rushed over, his carefully cultivated composure cracking. He looked at the destruction, at Caroline's innocent expression, at Renee's calm face, and made his choice in an instant. "Madame," he said, addressing Renee with cold formality, "this is unacceptable. These bottles were 8,000 euros, cash, now, or I will have no choice but to contact the authorities." Renee reached into her bag with deliberate slowness, pulling out a black credit card that caught the light. The simple movement seemed to infuriate Caroline, who pushed closer, her phone camera zooming in. "Watch this, everyone," she narrated to her rapidly growing audience. "She probably stole that card. I've seen this before. They come in here, try to scam these beautiful establishments." Beatrice, emboldened by her daughter's performance and the gathering crowd of onlookers, stepped forward and grabbed Renee's collar. "Let me see the name on that card," she demanded, her fingers twisting in the fabric of Renee's blouse. "Prove you didn't steal it, thief." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Beatrice pulled harder, her diamond ring catching in the delicate cotton. The sound of tearing fabric was obscenely loud in the suddenly silent boutique. Renee's blouse ripped open, exposing her, humiliating her, reducing her to an object of spectacle in front of dozens of recording phones. She stood there, holding the torn fabric closed with trembling hands, her dignity hanging by the same threads as her destroyed shirt. The boutique erupted, gasps, whispers, the frantic clicking of phones capturing every angle of her humiliation. Caroline's livestream viewer count hit 50,000, the comments section. A rushing river of cruelty and mockery. Security guards appeared from nowhere, their hands on Renee's arms, already convinced of her guilt by the mere fact of her presence, her appearance, her blackness. In a space that had clearly decided she didn't belong, Felipe's voice rang with authority and finality. "You've caused enough disruption. OUT now, before we press charges for destruction of property and creating a public disturbance." Renee didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg or explain or defend herself against accusations that had no basis in reality. Instead, she pulled her torn shirt closed, looked directly into Beatrice Van Ryn's eyes, and spoke with a calmness that was somehow more terrifying than any display of anger could have been. "You have no idea what you've just done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you will." She walked out of Maison Éternelle with her head high, her spine straight, her dignity intact, despite everything. Outside, the Geneva morning had turned bright and warm, indifferent to the violence that had just occurred within those glass walls. Renee sat on a stone bench across the street, still holding her shirt closed, her body shaking now that she was alone. But she wasn't shaking from fear or shame. She was shaking with the controlled fury of someone who had just been handed all the justification she needed. She pulled out her phone and made a single call. "Grace," she said when her assistant answered. "It's time." "Execute protocol, Nightingale." Across the Atlantic, mechanisms began to turn. A private jet took off from a New York airfield carrying lawyers and documents that would reshape lives. In Paris, corporate headquarters received urgent communications that sent executives scrambling. Phone networks lit up across Europe with a single stunning news alert. Mystery investor moves against Éternelle International. Inside Maison Éternelle, Philippe's phone rang. He answered with his usual polished greeting, then went absolutely pale. His hands began to shake as he pulled up the transaction he had refused to process, the credit card he had assumed was stolen. The name on the account read, René Baptiste, CEO, Baptiste Global Holdings. With trembling fingers, he typed her name into a search engine. The headlines appeared like accusations. The Invisible Billionaire, how René Baptiste built an empire in secret. Tech heiress owns 67% of Éternelle International. René Baptiste, the woman who rebuilt her family's fortune from ashes. Philippe's vision blurred as he clicked through articles, each one revealing another layer of his catastrophic mistake. The woman they had humiliated, assaulted, and thrown out of the boutique was worth $8.3 billion. She controlled over 200 companies across 40 countries, and she owned the very floor he was standing on. The story of how Renee had acquired her wealth was itself a testament to resilience and brilliance. Her great-grandfather had been a Pullman porter, saving every penny from tips and wages that should have been impossible to save from. Her grandfather had invested in real estate during the civil rights era, buying properties through white intermediaries because black families were legally barred from ownership in the neighborhoods that would later become prime real estate. Her father had built a tech empire in the 1980s, developing patents for software that would later become industry standard, only to be forced out by racist investors who couldn't stomach the idea of a black man controlling such valuable intellectual property. He had died believing he had lost everything, never knowing that he had protected his most valuable assets through a network of offshore accounts and hidden patents. Renee, at just 23, had discovered her father's secret legacy. She had spent 19 years rebuilding in absolute secrecy, buying companies through shell corporations, accumulating power while remaining completely invisible. She had learned that the world treated you differently when they didn't know you owned it, and she had made that invisibility her greatest weapon. She walked into her own stores regularly, dressed as an ordinary woman, to see exactly how her employees treated people who looked like her. What she discovered had both broken her heart and hardened her resolve, and now she had all the evidence she needed. Within hours, Caroline's video had spread like wildfire, 12 million views and climbing, but the narrative had shifted in ways the Van Ryn family could never have anticipated. Investigative journalists had identified Renee. The hashtag boutique thief had been replaced by hashtag they ripped a billionaire, and more importantly by hashtag how many other Renees. People were asking the questions that mattered. How many other black women had been treated this way? How many had been humiliated, assaulted, accused, without the protection of billions to defend them? The Van Ryn family's phones became instruments of torture, ringing constantly with calls from lawyers, business partners, and social connections suddenly desperate to distance themselves. Caroline's social media channels hemorrhaged followers. Brands that had partnered with her began quietly severing ties. Hendricks Bank received urgent communications about the financial exposure of their relationship with Éternelle International, a relationship that Renee now controlled absolutely. The next morning, Renee returned to Maison Éternelle. This time, she wore a power suit in charcoal gray, custom-tailored, unmistakably expensive. She was flanked by lawyers carrying briefcases that seemed to contain the weight of consequences. The entire corporate board of Eternel International had flown in overnight. They stood in the boutique like defendants awaiting judgment, which in essence they were. Philippe, Christine, and the security guards who had grabbed Renee's arms were terminated on the spot, their severance packages contingent on signing ironclad non-disclosure agreements. The Van Ryn family arrived minutes later, summoned by their lawyer, Hendrik's usual arrogance replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like fear. Beatrice Van Ryn, the woman who had grabbed Renee's collar and ripped her shirt, fell to her knees in the center of the boutique. The dramatic gesture might have been moving if it weren't so clearly calculated. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking with what might have been genuine terror. "We didn't know who you were. Caroline is young, stupid, she doesn't understand. Please don't destroy us." Renee looked down at the woman kneeling before her, and her response was colder than any curse could have been. "You didn't assault me because you didn't know who I was," she said quietly. "You did it because you thought I was nobody. That's the problem. You would have done the same thing to any black woman who walked through those doors. The only thing my billions change is whether or not you face consequences." The Van Ryn family braced for financial destruction, for the kind of ruin that Renee could deliver with a single phone call. But what she demanded instead was something far more challenging. The Van Ryn family would personally fund and manage a comprehensive program teaching respect and equity in retail spaces. They would do this for 5 years, unpaid, dedicating their time and resources to undoing the harm their attitudes had perpetuated. Caroline would document every moment on her platform, showing her followers not luxury content, but the hard work of unlearning prejudice and rebuilding character. Hendrik would divest from any business with discriminatory practices, a requirement that would reshape his entire investment portfolio. But Renee's vision extended far beyond punishing one family. She announced the establishment of a €500 million initiative called the Invisible Customer Project. The program would send ordinary-looking people of all races into luxury establishments across the globe. Businesses that failed the test would lose contracts, certifications, and partnerships. She was creating a database of respect, a system of accountability that would reach into every corner of the industry she controlled. 6 months later, Renee walked into a boutique in Tokyo. She was dressed simply again, testing, always testing. A young black girl, perhaps 16, was shopping with her mother, both of them browsing with the careful hesitation of people who had learned to expect rejection. Renee watched as a sales associate approached them with a warm smile, offering champagne, treating them with the same respect afforded to every customer. The associate noticed Renee observing and approached her quietly. "We completed the invisible customer training," the woman said softly. "I learned things I'm ashamed I didn't know before." But never again will someone be treated as less than human in any space I control. Renee smiled, and for the first time in months, it was a smile of genuine hope. This was why she had done it. Not for revenge, though that had been satisfying. Not for justice, though that had been necessary, but for change, real change, the kind that rippled outward and touched lives she would never meet. The transformation culminated at the Baptiste Foundation Gala, where Renee was honored for her retail reform work. The ballroom glittered with the elite of the business world, all of them now acutely aware of who she was and what she could do. But the moment that mattered most came when Christine, the store associate who had followed her through Maison Éternelle with contempt in her eyes, approached her. Christine was now the director of the Invisible Customer Project, rehabilitated, educated, fundamentally changed. "Mrs. Baptiste," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just teach me about respect. You taught me about grace. You could have destroyed me, erased me, made me unemployable. Instead, you gave me the chance to become someone better. Thank you for not giving up on me." Renee took Christine's hand, seeing in her transformation the possibility of a better world. Later, when the cameras turned to her for a final statement, she spoke directly to the lens, knowing her words would reach millions. They ripped my shirt, she said, her voice steady and strong, but they couldn't touch my dignity. Because dignity isn't given by others, it's kept by you. The real power isn't in being seen, it's in knowing your worth even when you're invisible. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimated. Treat everyone with respect, not because of who they might be, but because of who you are. Because respect costs nothing, but disrespect? That can cost everything. The screen faded to black and a final quote appeared in elegant script. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But grace changes the world. The words hung there, a reminder that the greatest victories come not from crushing those who wrong us, but from building a world where such wrongs become impossible.